Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're taking a crack at one of my absolute favorite Japanese dishes of all time, which is a katsu Donburi rice bowl inspired by this Yuri on ice scene.
Yuri, 駅で会った時から思ってたけど、あんたのその腹何？トシエさん、笑い事じゃないですよ。フィギュアスケーターとしてあるまじき太り方ですよ。
昔から太りやすかったもんな。そんなか。今夜はいっぱいカツ丼食べんね。
Yeah, so just gonna quietly overlook this whole shitstorm of body shaming with a quick reminder that you should eat whatever the fuck you want, and you are literally the only person that gets to decide what your body looks like, and being thin does not necessarily equate to being beautiful. And anyway, the Yu-topia Katsuki specialty dish, or pork cutlet bowl that they are referring to, is a Japanese katsu Donburi, which is a deep-fried pork or chicken cutlet that is then braised in an egg and dashi broth base with some veggies for a super tender, hearty, and filling rice bowl. We're going to be using a few of my favorite veggie additions today, including some onions and pickled daikon radish, but the highlight of the dish is going to be our katsu cutlets, which specifically must be a leftover cutlet in order for it to become tender in the braise. This here is some leftover chicken katsu cutlet from our chicken katsu plate lunch video not too long ago, but you can do this with pork cutlet too if that's your fancy. Also, if you are looking for the recipe on chicken katsu, you can find that here. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so I'm starting things off as with many Woo Can Cook recipes with 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of finely minced ginger. These are going to go into our wok very first as our aromatic elements as we start building up layers of umami today. Then moving on, I'm slicing up 2 green onions here, which I'm separating by their whites and greens so that we can use the whites in our initial wok fry as part of our aromatic elements. Then I'm slicing up the greens here on a bias and setting them aside to be used as our finishing garnish later on. Moving on to our veggies, you can go ahead and use any number of vegetables at this point. I've seen some really great uses of things like bean sprouts, edamame, cabbage, as well as some very excellent minimalist versions which literally have no vegetables at all. As with many leftover inspired dishes like this one, you should use whatever you happen to have on hand. For our version today though, I'm going to be using a super classic combination of about a 1/3 cup or maybe 3 dozen coins of sliced pickled daikon radish, followed by some thinly sliced sweet white onion. We'll be adding these into our braise along with the chicken cutlet for a super tender vegetable element, which should be a nice contrast from the crispy wok fried veggies that we've had in many of our Chinese wok fries of late. Next up are my eggs, which I'm whisking up with about half a teaspoon of cornstarch to help these things keep from turning rubbery. Then finally, last but not least, I'm getting to my chicken katsu here, which are coming right out of the refrigerator about a week old at this point. We need these things to be pretty stale for our purposes today, contrary to the crispy, crunchy qualities that we were looking for when we were serving these fresh. This is because we're trying to turn our breading into a more tender bite here. I'm slicing these fairly thin and, most importantly, being very careful to preserve the general shape of the cutlet here. We want this shape to hold together through the braise because it's going to be a super classic and iconic part about how a katsu Donburi is plated. Finally, I'm setting all of this aside and we're moving on to our wet ingredients. Okay, so I'm starting off here by reconstituting a cup's worth of dashi stock. Now, I'm just making this from the powdered stuff today, but for those who are not familiar, dashi stock is made from kombu, which is a type of sea kelp. This means we're going to be deriving a lot of fishy umami from it. I've had a few thoughts on different ways you can substitute it if you can't find this stuff. The first thing that comes to mind is some fish sauce plus some vegetable stock and maybe a pinch of MSG. But honestly, it's such a critical part of this dish and the powdered stuff is super easy to find online that I really don't recommend trying to sub it out. In a separate bowl, I'm also assembling some additional elements here to help bolster our stock today. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start, followed by 1 tablespoon each of rice vinegar, mirin, and dry sake for some brightness and acidity. Then I'm rounding this all out with a single tablespoon of brown sugar, followed by my personal favorite addition, 1 tablespoon of white miso paste. This, as Emerald Lagasse would say, is going to kick things up a notch with all kinds of fermented umami here. I'm just making sure that my miso paste is properly broken down in my sauce base here, and we're ready to head over to the stove. Over on the stove, I have my wok heating as hot as possible, and then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil, and as always, long yao for your non-stick surface. Then I'm blooming my aromatic elements here first. This is my garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions going in. I'm tossing this for about 10 seconds until fragrant, then immediately adding my dashi stock and onions. We're gonna let this simmer for about 3 to 5 minutes until those onions become fairly translucent, adding some additional water here as necessary if our simmer starts to look a little low. Once our onions are about 80% cooked through, I'm adding my pickled daikon to the wok, followed by my sauce mixture. I'm adding this sauce very gradually, about 3 to 4 tablespoons at a time, and pausing to taste until we reach the color, consistency, and flavor that we want here. As always, we want to be careful not to over-season at this point, and remember, don't just dump everything in or you can absolutely over-season doing this. Finally, I'm rounding everything out with a pinch of kosher salt and then adding my katsu followed by my eggs. One more reminder that at this point, we want to be very careful to preserve the shape of our cutlet here, so don't do any more aggressive wok tossing once those cutlets are in, or else your plating will be destroyed. I'm letting this simmer until my eggs are set, giving it an occasional gentle shake, and then I'm getting my largest spatula and doing my absolute best to grab as much of the cutlet in one go as possible. Finally, I'm finishing this all off with the greens of my green onions, and we're ready to eat. So, this is one of my favorite Japanese lunch plates of all time, maybe even more than the fresh fried chicken katsu that we made, and it was secretly maybe the reason why I made chicken katsu a few weeks ago too, for the leftover katsu. It's a super hearty meal with a lot of interesting umami coming from our dashi stock and miso paste, and it's generally just a super classic comfort food for me. Maybe more importantly, it's also a really easy meal to whip together if you have some extra cutlets left over. So the next time that you make chicken katsu, maybe make a few extra cutlets for a donburi later on too. In addition, it's also a fairly pantry-friendly meal and it refrigerates really well, so if you're looking for some meal prep ideas, this is a really great one. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. This is a great one to try out if you're just getting your feet wet with deep frying, because it's fairly forgiving since we're just using leftover katsu anyway. We'll be cooking through this one live this coming Monday at 6:30 PST right here on YouTube, so be sure to tune in then and cook along with me if you want. Also be sure to bop over to the all-new woocancook.com for the written recipes, the schedule of live streams and releases, new Woo Cooks beats, tunes, and more. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, press some buttons, and I'll see you soon.